thank you for having me. So yeah, I'm Alicia. So I've got the rather marvellous job title of Human-Wildlife Coexistence Officer. So Human-Wildlife Coexistence Officer, and it is basically what it says on the tin. It's just finding ways to help people and wildlife live together. I tend to do more down the social route than the ecology route, although sometimes I do get to go out and get muddy boots. So here today to talk to you about living alongside returning and recovering wildlife. So for me, my wildlife focus, it is the returning and the recovering rather than what we're already existing with. So we're talking things more like beaver, pine marten. There's consultations going on at the moment for other things. So it's that rather than the foxes and the rats and that sort of thing. So this is what we're going to cover today. Basically, why is it important? A case study of one of the projects that Somerset Wildlife Trust is involved with. And then probably the thing that's important for you here, what practical actions can you take at home to either support this recovery or to help adapt to it? Then I've been told that time-honoured tradition is you have a break, and I think there are some trees that are going at a bargain price. And then after that, come back and you can grill me, but please do it nicely. So why are we talking about this at all? So you might have heard we're very nature depleted at the moment. This is the Biodiversity Intactness Index. So what this is a metric basically that looks at baseline records of plants, animals and fungi and compares how they used to be compared to how they're doing now in response to human pressures. And this shows that we're not doing very well. The UK, 12 is we want to be a high number, not a low number, so 12 is really not very good. And of the UK nations, England is the worst performing. The Intactness Index has calculated we need to be 90% for ecological resilience and safety. The global average is 75, we're at 50. So it's not looking great. To put that in monetary perspective, the World Economic Forum has calculated that if we have this ecological collapse, it's equivalent to over 50% of global GDP. I would argue that actually it's 100% because without clean air, without fresh water, without pollinators, we've got nothing, but I'm not the economist in the room. This is the UK trend. You can look at this one of two ways. Either, great, it's not getting any worse, or actually, despite everything that we're doing, it's not getting any better. We've still got a lot of work to do. This is looking at it another way. This is one of my soapbox topics, so you'll have to forgive me for this. We are so good at talking about the plight of the polar bears, the impact of climate change on polar bears, or the global trade in pangolin scales, or persecution of elephants for tusks in Africa. We're not very good at talking about our own species. When you look at this, I'm going to use my fancy pointer here, you can see we've got such a long way to go in the UK. And I think what we forget in the UK is we've got some amazing species here. We really, really do. And what we've got here is exotic to other people. After the white-tailed eagle reintroduction in Mull, tourism soared there. Over 80% of people that go to the Isle of Wight cite seeing the wildlife there as one of their main reasons for going. Really, we've got so much to be proud of here, and I think groups like yours who are working on that, be really proud of what you're doing. We really need to focus on what's going on at home. So, back to that. What is going on at home? One of our case studies. So, Somerset Wildlife Trust, our approach is less about species reintroduction, and I know that sounds strange given I'm standing here talking about recovering wildlife, but our approach is if you get the habitat right, then you're encouraging species back. When other people are doing these projects, those populations will need to disperse at some point. So if we put the foundations in place, they've got somewhere to go. What I particularly love about that is it's really forward-looking. So it means that the species that are going to be coming are the ones that are going to thrive in that context, and they're going to be the right ones for that context rather than what we've arbitrarily said. Also, as an island nation, we're helping when we're seeing species that are naturally migrating polewards. We need to support our species to do that. But when you're looking at these reintroduction projects, it is about more than just that particular species, and I think that's one of the things that is so appealing about the Two Moors project. So whilst ostensibly it's about reintroduction of pine martens, actually it's so much more than that. There's a whole lot of habitat restoration work that's going on. Part of this is about restoring the woodland that the pine martens will be part of, so that they've got somewhere to go when they disperse, but also as their impact, which will help these recovering. There are other species that need to recover, whether that's through woodland regeneration, creating habitat for them, whether it's creating food for them, or the pine marten themselves helping to regulate populations so that you're then getting a healthy, balanced ecosystem with no species predominating and none that are falling behind, which leads me on to this little chappy up here, the invasive species control. But I said at the start, for me, my job's about social side of it. So we've also got a lot of community engagement that goes on through this, whether that is going into schools, there are school packs, but the project has also built into it a traineeship programme. So it's a 3-year programme going on there, which is basically tiered. There's an initial intake, and it will narrow down each year, leading on to 2 apprenticeships. So at the end of this, there's 2 people out there who are employed with a ranger role, hopefully, because of this pine marten translocation, which I think is quite incredible. There's also the opportunity to do resources. So people who are working at home, this one's actually about, this is a pine marten picnic pack. So there's community engagement events going on there as well. But there's also extra materials about how can you really engage people in this project and wider ecological restoration. This one, this actually wasn't taken at the event, but stakeholder forums. You can bring together different parties with different interests. They can talk for themselves. We can talk through different issues that they might be facing. And these projects can then be a brilliant springboard if there are other challenges that might be existing alongside this. This gives an opportunity to talk those through and perhaps make things better for other projects that come afterwards. So yes, pine martens, but so much more than that through this recovering wildlife. So practical actions, what can you take? What can you do? So the first one, be community champions, which you are all doing through your role with Green and Ilminster. So I said it was about habitat restoration. I don't know what your family and home setups are, but I live in a terrace at the end of terrace in a town. So the likelihood for me to be involved in a species translocation, it's low. But these are all things that I can take part in at home. This is a shameless plug, by the way, as well. These are all projects that Somerset Wildlife Trust is involved with, and I know that Green Ilminster is already involved. But what I like about these is these are all designed to empower you, but they also involve putting out materials so that you can communicate to other people what it is you're doing and why. So Wilder Gardening and the Wilder Churches are a good example, where we're looking at slightly messier habitats now. These will both give advice about how you can communicate that to people so they can see the benefits of what you're doing. It's not just neglect. You're putting in place these habitats to support returning and recovering wildlife, given as that's where we're going with this talk. So that maybe they'll be inspired to do it as well. If you're the trailblazer leading the way, they might be inspired to follow. But that leads on to this one. I really like this picture because initially you look at it as, well, it must be the adult teaching the child, but actually it's the child that's holding the hammer here, so who's doing the teaching? But this does actually have a scientific basis to it too. There is research that, whilst I'm standing up here in my fancy branded outfit, actually, very often people will listen to younger generations more, and children can reverse quite ingrained beliefs in family members. So I think what we need to say there is don't write anyone off. Your allies can come from quite unexpected sources, and I think they're really important people to watch. But it's also people will listen to their own communities more than they will listen to us. They will listen to peers, and sometimes that will be above evidence-led, data-driven. If their peers are showing them what to do, their peers can talk to them, they trust you. So it's worth talking. And going back to that Two Moors project, you can see how multifaceted that is. So even if they're not interested in pine martens, if they're interested in invasive species, or actually we're interested in the younger generation, or I've been working with this group, there's always going to be something that you can pull them in with that interests them. Myths and misinformation, so that leads to the flip side of the coin. So we all know that rabid wolves are going to eat our children dressed in bonnets. The other one I find really interesting, fear of snakes is much higher in Christian communities than any other community. So I think that just shows the power of these. You give it as a throwaway sometimes. I mean, the Red Riding Hood example is a throwaway, and it suddenly takes hold. You're looking at beavers. The beaver in Narnia ate fish, and this has now become legend. They don't. There are other ecological reasons for their affiliation with water. It is not fish eating. So I think what I wanted to say with this slide was to support recovering, returning wildlife, be a bit of a responsible consumer about what it is that the media that you engage with, particularly in this age at the moment where AI is learning so fast, so quickly, what we're feeding it. What do you want AI to learn? That's where our role is. This is another one that I find quite interesting. When the number of times I've spoken to people and they've gone, it's a protected species, I can't do anything, I'll just have to shoot it. Firstly, please don't shoot it. Secondly, yes, they might be a protected species, but that doesn't mean there's no mitigation. There are ways that we can adapt. There are things that we can do to make that process easier. It might be regulated, but it doesn't mean there's nothing. So taking beaver as an example, this is the mitigation hierarchy that has been developed in consultation with Natural England. This is on the government website, so this is something that we have to follow, but it just shows that there are options. We have to start at number one, which is basically do nothing. If you're worried and there is something that you think might need to be done, then talk to a specialist in that area. We then, I don't know whether this is up or down, it's down the table, but up the hierarchy. After that, make space for beavers. But then there are mitigation things that we can do. The other thing to flag with this is this here. Obviously, we've got to start at one. If that's not enough, then we can increase intensity. But one of the things I like about this is it's not a case that I've moved down, I can't go back. If suddenly something changes, if your tolerance level increases or realise that actually the impact isn't as bad as you thought it was going to be, or any number of reasons, you can actually go back down to something that's lower impact. But if you then say, actually, no, I did need that extra level of support, you can come back up again. We can play with this. So I hope this is reassuring that you're not by yourself. There are things we can do, and it's not irreversible. So moving through, what can you do? These are actually all non-licensable things. So yes, it's a protected species, but there are things that you can do anyway. And these are really quite simple things. Normal land management. So if you are mowing by a riparian strip, you're still allowed to mow your grass. That's absolutely fine. You're still allowed to pollard your trees. You can put, if you've got a particularly sensitive tree that you really like, you can put a tree guard around that. That's fine. What you can't do is, because they're a protected species, you can't do anything that impairs their ability to survive or reproduce, is essentially what it boils down to. So you couldn't fence them away from absolutely every single tree if that's their only source of food. But if you've got one really valuable, what did you say we've got? Rowan trees, silver birch. Actually, their favourites are more along the lines of willows, aspens, the things that coppice. But you could put a tree guard around that. That's not a problem. With the fencing, you can exclude them. You can't do anything that amounts to enclosing them in an area because that then is licensable. But there's nothing to exclude them. Nothing wrong with excluding them. You can't use electric fencing, preferably. But again, this comes back to if you've got a query or a concern, pick up the phone, send an email, talk to people, we'll talk you through it. People who end up working in this industry do it because it's a passion. There is no concern that is too small. They will be willing to support you. But if having gone through these, you're still, it hasn't resolved the concern for you, as I said, we can go down the mitigation hierarchy. So there are low impact options. This is one that you, as landowners, could do. This training is currently free through Natural England. Whether that will change in time, who knows? But at the moment, this is available. This is only something that you can use outside of the breeding season, but it's there. If you were interested, the details are on the government website. Again, we can keep going up. CL51, again, open to us as land owners, land managers, land advisors. Again, Natural England offers this free of charge. Look at the government website. But it still doesn't end there. So yes, protected species, but we've still got stuff we can do. This gets a bit more technical, and actually even I don't have any of these licenses yet, but there are people out there who do. I think by saying that that even I don't have this yet, hopefully that just speaks to the fact that this framework is in place. There's actually only one organisational licence at the moment. The demand is so small. And I think that's something we need to remember here, that actually we're well prepared. There's a lot still needs to be done, but we do have options, and this is being well thought through. Which leads on to, whilst we are thinking through, and there are still things that need to be developed, actually a lot of what we've got in place, these are not new actions that we're thinking about here. We're transferring existing knowledge. That's not to say we aren't having to come up with new mitigation methods or think about how existing methods might be adapted, but it's not always completely alien to us. So we'll go to pine martens this time. As an example, predation on domestic poultry and pen game birds. I don't know anyone in the room has chickens, but my guess is you're probably already taking steps to protect them against things like foxes, stoats, that sort of thing. So you're probably already going out and checking that the coop is in good condition. You're probably already shutting them in at night. Probably may have electric fencing along their top and bottom to prevent against burrowing or climbing in. Possibly even having it away from hedgerows to make them slightly harder to get. These are all things that will help you with pine martens too. So yes, it's a new species, but you don't necessarily need to adapt that much. Again, denning in buildings. This one's possibly slightly more high impact. But again, breaking it down, when you go home, you're probably already checking your house. If you've got a loose tile, is the guttering coming off? At the same time as doing that check, you're hopefully already checking whether you've got holes in the soffits, things like that, and hopefully already doing those repairs. So that covers you for this. Within that, though, so let's then take a further step. If you notice that perhaps there was some burrowing under a garden shed, might be a badger, protected species. So at that point, you're probably going to call out someone who knows about badgers, who has licenses for dealing with that. So again, you're going to do the same for the pine marten. If you see that hole in the roof and you think, or you've seen evidence of a pine marten being around, because they're a protected species, you can't just block up that access to them. But what I'm saying here is we're already familiar with the concept of if you've got a protected species on your land, actually, I'll pick up the phone and I'll talk to someone who's got the expertise in that area. Same applies with the pine martens. As I said earlier, people who are working in this sector, whether their motivation is the pine martens or whatever side it is, they're doing it because it's a passion and they want people to be able to live alongside. So they will be more than willing to help you. Coming further down, another thing I was thinking as a comparable, if you notice that they're there as a comparable, you might notice that you've got a bird nest in your porchway or something, and really that's not the place that you want your bird nest. You're probably not going to do anything with it that year, so that goes to the you can't block up the entrance to the pine marten den that year whilst it's still there. But what you might do is say the following year, actually I'm going to put a net up across the porchway so the bird can't nest there again in future. So what you're doing with the pine marten is saying, okay, they're there this year, but once it's legal for me to go in and intervene, once I know they've moved out, I might block that up. Same kind of principle applies. You see where I'm going with this. So yeah, new species, but hopefully what we're doing already, we can cross-apply. This one's a slightly lighter touch, and I did debate the order of this one because it is lighter touch, but I know that for a lot of people, I've just put in my veg garden in my nice new house. This is a labour of love. I don't want it to come along and be eaten. So I know that this is going to be meaningful. So the coexistence strategies here, I have to think when I'm putting this garden in, how do I want to deal with this? I can either put cages and nets around, I can grow some sacrificial fruit, or I can say, actually, this is amazing, being able to see this extra wildlife that's coming in. I say that this is not so different to normal. We're probably already doing these things. You make these decisions about the birds, the butterflies, the caterpillars that come in. So same applies. Those are just a few examples. And I do have to say that whilst I've just said that those are cross-applying all knowledge, I am also aware that there are going to be times where there are new things that need to be put in place or that need tweaking, things like pest control. How does that work now that we've got pine martens in the landscape? So yes, we might need to adapt, but that's where we're here to talk you through it. This one, money does grow on trees. We're very squeamish about talking about money in terms of nature. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but it's a metric that we all understand, and it is a metric that we can use. And going back to the start of this, where I said that reintroduction projects all of them will have something that bring people in. Money is something that we all need to survive, so it might be that this is the thing that gets them on board. So I don't think we should be as squeamish about it as we are. So what can we do? For those of you who do have land holdings, there are agri-environment schemes out there. Some of them are starting to talk good money, and there have been, I know that there was a bit of backtracking and a bit of uncertainty, but there have been a lot of announcements this week. It seems, I don't know where they've got this pot of money from, but it seems like we're good to go again on quite a lot of these grants that had the red light put on them. I understand that sometimes applying for these grants, even when you know that you're eligible for them, can be nerve-wracking and stressful. Throw in a new species where you're having to cross-apply, even more so. But again, talk us through it. Everything was novel once. It's new until it's not. Keep going with this until it becomes the norm. Natural England is advising to go for these, and that's including cross-applying, so things like riparian buffer strips. It's not specifically designed with beavers in mind, but it very definitely applies to beaver activity. Give it a go. It's worth it. Coming back to the trees, this was timely and topical. It's not just the government. There are grants out there available through charities, other organisations, so it's always worth looking to see what's out there. This one I mentioned earlier on as well. This was the white-tailed eagles to Isle of Wight, showing just how popular that reintroduction was and what that could bring to the economy in terms of tourism. This is harking back to where I started. So I did some time working for Highland Wildlife Trust. Whilst I was there, tiger cubs were born. the local fudge shop created tiger-striped fudge. So that's what that alludes to. It was basically just being, you can be creative with your marketing, do something pulls people in. There's all sorts of merchandise out there that you can capitalise on here. So like the Pine Martin picnics, whilst those are being offered free of charge, there are things you can do, whether that brings a local cafe in, whatever it is. Guided tours, talks, that sort of thing. People will pay good money. Wildlife photography. This is quite for business diversification at the moment, which I think is possibly something that is going to be very relevant for Somerset particularly. Again, there's things that we can do, and that builds business resilience in for you as well. So again, that's when you've got the tourism, that's a glamping pod, but one of the things I particularly liked about this, you probably won't be able to see it, the book's actually called Bear Hugs. So again, you're bringing in the whole creative arts industry in there as well, whether you've got TV programmes, podcasts, whatever it is that hooks them. Again, this was one that I really liked. This didn't have money attached to it, but I can see that there is a business model there. And I liked it as a way of creative thinking and developing businesses that are already there. So what this one referred to was the Golden Eagle project in Moffat. When that was being done, they worked with the local communities. They took a very different approach. They were going to be very public about where these animals were. And that included a volunteer scheme and they got local community in to basically guard the nests. And one of the groups they got in was the local brownies. So they created a badge for the brownies who've helped volunteer. So that's who these kids are. They're the ones that got their badge. So I think all this speaks to is the opportunities are there. Coming back to the title of this talk about learning to live alongside recovering, returning wildlife, let's look at the wider opportunities here. Yes, there's ecological, yes, there's social, but there's also economic, so there's always going to be something. And if money's the thing that speaks to people, then I'm not trying to commodify nature here, but it might help. Speak up. I promise I'm not going to get political here, but... So this came out under the Conservative government. Beaver at the bottom, so I'm going to use this as the case study. The Conservatives did a lot. We had the River Otter beaver trial during the Conservatives, that mitigation hierarchy, the class licence system, the government grants that came in. We did make good progress, but it's still not possible to release wild living beavers in England, which is a problem on so many levels. At the moment, we can release them into enclosures. Beaver families are getting bigger, the enclosures aren't, so there are welfare issues associated with that. Beavers are currently the only native species not classed as a dangerous animal that is being forced to live in enclosures. So that's a very strange optic. It doesn't help us as a country move towards our internationally legally binding biodiversity targets. There are a lot of challenges there. But I work for a charity, so I have to I cannot sway your voting rights at all. So you can imagine how relieved I was when this one came out under the Labour government for pure impartiality. So what I want to say here, politicians want votes. Coming back to living alongside recovering and returning species. If this is something important to you, and here I'm going much wider than beavers, if you want to see an increase in biodiversity in this country, and I take you back to that biodiversity and intactness index at the start, given how far we've got to go, speak to your MP. And I spoke to someone who's much better, his work is in the policy line, so he gave me the 3 top tips for this. He said, firstly, you need to go with a very clear message. What is it that you want them to do? He did also say, if you can take a child along with you, so much the better. Apparently that also helps. Secondly, if you can take something tangible, evidence along to prove what it is that you're trying to achieve, then that helps. Thirdly, give them a clear action that you want them to take on the basis of that. As I say, politicians do want votes. If we can speak up and say what we want from them, put that pressure on. I mean, I was listening to the radio on the way over, and you've probably heard about the renewables energy, oil and gas drilling decision today, driven by people pressure. So let's use our voices for something positive in this. So my takeaways from that, Britain is important too. And what you're doing as Green and Ilminster, looking after your local patch, I'm so much in admiration of everything that you're doing. Keep up, and let's keep the focus on what's going on in our own country. I'm not saying don't take an interest in international. That's important too. But we do need champions for our own community. Be a champion in your own community. Talk about it to people. Be that trailblazer. Let them see. Take the fear away from them. They can actually visualise then what it's going to look like, what the impact's going to be. They can see that whilst that change might be uncomfortable for them, the end result is worth it. Stay curious. Be credible. That goes back to that myth-busting thing. If there's something that you're unsure about, if you query that ecological basis to it, look into it a bit more. There are mitigation options out there. Just because it's protected, just because you might have to jump through an extra hoop, it doesn't mean there's nothing we can do. There might be new mitigation methods, but we can also cross-apply. People want your votes, so speak up. And I believe in time-honoured fashion. That means that you get to go and have a break now. Don't forget that raffle, don't forget those trees. And yeah, think about some questions you might have that are nice when you come back. This slide, I will say, I took this out before the sighting of the boar this week. So I don't know whether this is really opportune or really unfortunate, but go and take a drink like the boar.